Hello, Seats fans, and welcome to Company of Heroes Gamecast. I'll be your host, RMKG, and today we are gonna shy away from what has been making the front page of my YouTube channel lately as far as the content of the videos related to Company of Heroes goes. And what I mean by that is that this is gonna be some form of an extended review of a game. I don't want to name it anything else, and by anything else I mean a newbie review or a newbie cast or something like that. I mean, likes of this form of casting a game have, of course, been known to the gaming community for a while. Day Night has been doing them with newbie Tuesdays, I think it is. Harlequin actually did a series of casts regarding an amateur level of play during the Company of Heroes Online days. Although you could argue that Company of Heroes Online actually attracted an audience that was not familiar with it, and actually it could make sense. But I'm not sure how it and if it will make sense for Company of Heroes, taking into account how long it has been out and all that stuff. And that's exactly the reason, among other things including the fact that there's so many guides on GameReplays.org or elsewhere that you can look up and try to refine your play, or there are all those casts of more experienced players that you can watch and try to copy what they're doing, or try to find a point that you are missing in your game and integrate it into your play later. So if I continue this or not is going to depend entirely on the reaction that it gets. I mean, if you find it helpful or constructive or whatever else, if you get something out of it, of course it will give me an incentive to go on and do more in the future. So if you feel like that, leave a comment either on YouTube or on the replay thread, replay/cast thread on Game Replays, and I'll try to do more in the future. So as far as the game goes, we got a couple of players still learning the ropes of the game, or trying to implement some more advanced things into their game. So we're gonna view predominantly from the point of view of the American player, since this is actually the guy that actually the story behind this is that he actually messaged me during my streaming, and he asked me to take a look at his game. And that, of course, gave me the idea to do this extended review. So without further ado, I think I have cleared up anything I had to say about this, and why this is an extended review and not like a regular cast. Meaning that there may be pauses in the game to try to explain what is going on and what could have gone differently on, or what is missing in its players' actions and all that stuff. Anyway, let's start the game right now. By the way, there won't be an audio-only version of the cast because of the nature of the cast. So I'm free. I break free of the chains of having to do time things. So that's something else that I really enjoy, and most probably will enjoy, because I haven't done this before. Anyway, American player released standard pretty far up to now in the game, placing his barracks at a reasonably good location as far as he can get to the field as possible, so that his riflemen have to travel not only less when they come out of the barracks, but he can also reinforce them closer to the field whenever he has to retreat, than leaving them in the HQ and doing that there. Camping order, not something entirely out of the norm. Actually, the map does not really help that much in how you are going to be capping, although there are some variations where you will send your engineers to right to the south of your base, or to the north if you spawn to the south, and try to focus on the munition and the medium fuel point there. Now, one thing I need to point out right now is to know your matchup. It is, of course, an American versus Panzer Elite game, and Panzer Elite, of course, get the Kettengrad. The Kettengrad, that is a capping unit. Usually you want to hover over the fog of war when you're playing the actual game and try to listen for that Kettengrad sound, which is very distinctive, and you can actually tell where the Kettengrad is capping. If the American player had done that, he would realize that there was more than one Ketten on the field. There are actually 3 Kettens on the field. Now, what that is a massive amount of information that he can get early on in the game, and what it means is that not only he can be more aggressive with his riflemen if he so chooses to build more riflemen, but he could also get a jeep. And I'm not, by getting a jeep, I don't mean necessarily to abuse the pathing issue that the Kettengroods have with jeeps, but just to limit the capping power of the Panzer Elite player, because admittedly now the Panzer Elite player has a very good head start as far as his capping goes on the map, and that's something that Panzer Elite players generally lack as far as their early game goes because of the capping speed of the Panzergrenadiers. But of course the Kettens balance it out. However, if you mass Kettens, you don't have any firepower on the field. So that's exactly some point that I want to make. Scout the map, hover over the fog of war. You can still hear the sounds of engines, of vehicles, and Kettengroods in this case. So the American player could have all that so important information as far as what his opponent is doing goes. We had, of course, some booby traps going off. So that's an early indication, of course, that the Wehrmacht player is going for scorched earth, so that the American player he needs to have in mind to just try to avoid those traps, and he does so in the west, for example, so that's pretty good. Now, this is a point that I want to make where the rally point of a structure actually hinders your ability to respond to a threat. You saw those riflemen driving all that distance going to the south and then having to go to the north to face off that Kettengrad. Now, when you see a threat on the field, it's actually really easy to re-rally the building that is producing your combat unit and have the response there. You can do either that or just tap continuously with your hotkey over the building that is of importance, in this case the barracks, by pressing F1, that is. I mean F2. F1 is the HQ. Pressing F2, keep an eye on how far the unit has gone as far as its completion goes, and then send it immediately to where the threat is, because that Ketten could have been fended off rather earlier. And now this is a case of shift clicking here. The engineer, of course, after capping, had been ordered to lay down a mine, but the American player forgot to respond to that particular threat. Shift queuing command is, of course, one of the most important things, not only in Company of Heroes, but in other RTSs as well. However, the American player does make good use of cover. He has his knowledge of the game as far as cover goes down. However, he needs to work a little bit more on how his multitasking goes. And shift queuing is one way to limit or to reduce the amount of multitasking you have to do. That Rifleman squad, of course, will have to retreat. This will stand a lot of a chance there. And this is something else that I need to point out. The American player has OP'd or built an observation post outside of his base on that strategic sector. That's something that you really never ever want to do. If you cannot defend a strategic sector as important as that particular one with your combat units, then you really are doing something wrong. And by wrong, I don't mean necessarily that your whole idea of how to play is wrong, but you do not put that faith in how much your units can do. Especially after having seen all those Kettens and knowing more or less that the Panzer Elite player cannot have that many infantry units on the field that could actually pressure your cat off and actually make it so that you don't have any resource income. So that's another thing that we need to pay attention to. This, of course, riflemen on move command must probably face off some MP44 big ones. Once again, better have your units on attack move, even if they are Americans, because in this case he could have avoided that confrontation for the most damaging part of it.
Recon flight standing by.
And while all this was happening, the American player is actually started floating a bit of manpower. As in any RTS, you really need to spend your money on units. More so in Company of Heroes, because Company of Heroes do not have that that mechanic as a game that you can actually, if you have a lot of money, you can build a ton of unit producing structures and just spend all that money. You usually have one unit producing structure at each tier of tech in Company of Heroes, so you really can't afford having all those resources lying around. And around 500 manpower for the American player is like a lot of resources. Now, where the American player faltered as far as his resource floating situation goes is when he had to focus on battles on the field, which is of course a case of lacking that multitasking ability. Now, that multitasking ability does not come within a day. It's a long, tedious process, and you really have to continually try to refine it. So that's something that can be done as far as that goes. However, shift queuing, really, you have to integrate it into your play. It's pretty easy. You just order your units around by shift queuing their actions, and that's gonna make a huge difference as far as their usability goes on the field, as far as what they do goes on the field, as far as the effect of having units goes in the field, because units that actually sit idly around are not actually doing anything at all, unless you are like camping or something, or expecting an attack and you know that you have to stay there, and if you don't, you're gonna give your opponent a massive advantage. Otherwise, just continually do something with your units. Tier 3 has gone up, of course, the motor pool for the American player, and that he kind of blindly goes for tier 3. He doesn't really know what his opponent is doing. He has seen some MP44 Grens. He has taken the most portion of the west of the map. He tries to stop harassment of the Panzer player to the north by building an observation post on his field, which is actually much better, and in this case actually may turn out beneficial for the American player. As far as his fuel income goes. And we just witnessed once again what that observation post has done outside of his base. Actually, pretty much nothing. The Panzer Elite player actually took control of that east portion of the map, and the observation post did not even really had to come into play. I mean, it's totally ignored unless you directly go for that particular point, and since the Panzer player already had this portion of the map, he really did not need to focus that much on that particular strategic sector. So once again, if pretty much in 99% of situations, you don't have to OP strategic sectors in the game. You really have to defend them with your units, especially if they're a cutoff, as of course we know cutoffs exist on maps like Angle. Now, this particular engagement is a lot of information that the American player gets. He has seen that the Panzer player has a lot of big runs, has already Shreks on them, and he also has a lot of MP44s. Now, that is a telling sign that the Panzer Elite player did not really spend munitions on that, but actually get the tech to do so, because all that weapons actually, if you try to factor them in and make some calculations and figure out the costs, if all those units had been upgraded with the weapons and not built with the weapons from the start, that would have been like 500 munitions, and that's a lot of munitions at such an early phase of the game. So those units were actually built with their weapons enabled, so the Panzer player has already a Panzerjäger command on the field, he already has a Kampfruppe company on the field, and he has, of course, most probably upgraded the Shreks and got those Shreks on those Panzer Grenadiers. So that's a lot of information that the American player has. Now, the problem is what he is doing to respond to that. We have seen that he has gone for airborne, which is, of course, gives him the ability to strafe your opponent, and strafing against mass pigments can be really devastating. However, he opts to use that munitions on laying down M8 mines. Now, that is not really... It is good. I mean, mines are always good. But in this particular case, I would really favor saving up munitions for the strafe in case an all An all-out front attack comes from the Panzer Elite player, and I have nothing else to stop it. I also do not like at this particular phase of the game that the American player has sit back and plays